My girlfriend Sarah turned 26 in June. She's from Slovenia, which is a small country that she always says most people can't find on a map. She's right. I've tested it. She moved to Switzerland 3 years ago for work, and we met through mutual friends at some dinner I almost didn't go to. For her birthday, she wanted something she'd never done before. That was always her thing. Not restaurants or weekend trips somewhere warm. She wanted something that felt like a story she could tell later. I spent quite some time trying to come up with something, but nothing was close to what she wanted. I found the train by accident. I was reading through some travel forums, one of those Reddit threads about new rail routes in Asia, and someone had posted about it. China had just finished a new high-speed line connecting Manzhouli, a border town in Inner Mongolia, all the way east to Harbin, cutting straight through the dashing Ganling, the Greater Khingan Forest. Over 1 million square kilometers of dense Siberian taiga. The line had taken 7 years to build, and it was opening to the public on the 14th of June. Sarah's birthday was the 15th. The timing felt like something, so I booked 2 tickets on the inaugural run before I really thought it through. We flew into Harbin first, spent 2 days there, then took a slower train west to Manzhouli. It's a strange little city right on the Russian border. Russian architecture, Chinese signs, Mongolian food. It felt like someone had shuffled 3 different countries together without finishing the job. Sarah loved it. She took photos of everything. The nesting dolls in the shop windows, the Orthodox church sitting between 2 apartment blocks, the stray dogs sleeping on the warm pavement, and everything else we saw. We checked into a hotel near the station the night before. The room smelled like cleaning product and the window faced a wall, but it was fine. We had 1 drink in the bar downstairs, a place with a laminated menu and a TV showing football with no sound. The bartender spoke some English. When I mentioned the train, he put down the glass he was wiping and looked at me in a way that I noticed but didn't think much of at the time. He asked if we were on the first run. I said yes. He said something in Mandarin to the other man behind the bar. Then he smiled at me and said it was a very modern train. Very fast. He didn't say anything else about it. We went to bed around 10. Sarah fell asleep quickly. I lay there looking at the ceiling and thought about nothing in particular for a while before I drifted off. The next day, we got to the station just before midnight. It was busy in a way I hadn't expected. Not crowded in a chaotic sense. More like there was a particular energy in the space, the kind you get when something is new and people are aware of it being new. There were photographers near the platform entrance, a few people in suits who looked official, and a small crowd of passengers dragging luggage across the polished floor. The station itself was modern. Not finished looking, actually, because everything was still very clean and a little too bright. There was a large sign near the gate in Mandarin and English. It had the route and the train designation and the departure time, 12:07. Below the route information, there was a smaller line in both languages. It said something about the line being the result of 7 years of engineering and dedication, and that it was a symbol of progress in the region. We joined the queue. The train was already on the platform when we walked through. It was white and very long, and the front of it was shaped in that aerodynamic way that looked slightly aggressive from the side. It was clean the way something is clean before it's been used even once. There was a small ceremony near the front of the platform, some speeches I couldn't follow, and cameras flashing. We ignored all that and went to our car and put our bags up and sat down. Our seats were in car 4. The car was maybe 2/3 full. The seats were wide and the lighting was soft, and there was a small screen and a headrest in front of us. I remember thinking that for what I'd paid, it was actually quite comfortable. Sarah put her head on my shoulder after a few minutes. She asked me if I thought there would be anything to see outside. I told her probably not, given that it was the middle of the night and we were going through a forest, but that it might still be interesting. She said that was fine. She just liked trains. We pulled out of the station at 7 minutes past midnight. For the first hour and a half, everything was ordinary. There were other passengers around us. A family with 2 kids, both of them already asleep before we even left the station. A few younger guys near the back of the car laughing and passing snacks between them. A woman traveling alone reading something on a tablet. An older couple who didn't speak to each other but didn't seem unhappy about it either. The train was smooth and quiet. Outside the window there were lights from the city thinning out, then suburbs, then just dark fields. And then, slowly, the trees started. Just shapes at first, then denser. Then you couldn't see anything at all except the occasional flash of underbrush lit up by the train lights before it vanished behind us. Sarah had her eyes closed but wasn't sleeping. I could tell by the way she was breathing. I watched the trees for a while before putting on headphones. I took them off again. I tried to read something on my phone and got about 3 paragraphs in before I stopped. Around 2 in the morning, Sarah asked if I knew anything about the forest we were going through. I'd read a little bit before the trip. The Dashingan is one of the largest intact boreal forests in the world. It stretches across the border between Inner Mongolia and Heilongjiang province. There's some wildlife: Siberian roe deer, bears, and the occasional Amur leopard further north. It's cold in winter, genuinely cold, colder than most people in Europe have ever experienced. In summer it's dense and warm and the undergrowth gets thick enough to make it hard to move through on foot. I told her some of that. She said it seemed like an odd place to build a train line. I said they probably just needed the connection. Manjuli is a major freight hub. Getting goods to Harbin through there made sense. She nodded but didn't seem fully satisfied with that. I didn't think about it again until later, when I had more reason to. I did read one other thing about the line before we left. It wasn't in any of the official material. It was a comment buried in one of the forums from someone who said they had a contact who had worked on the construction. The construction had taken longer than planned and gone over budget significantly. Part of that was the terrain. The permafrost in certain sections made lane track complicated, and there had been problems with the tunneling in the 2 mountain sections. But part of it, the comment said, was something else. 41 workers had died during the build. 41 over 7 years. The commenter said that wasn't unusual for a project of that scale, but the way the deaths had been handled was. Several of them had disappeared rather than died in any documentable way. Vanished from sight during night shifts. In a couple of cases, the bodies were found, but the cause of death was listed as environmental exposure or accident, and the investigations were, the commenter said, closed very quickly. There had been protests from the workers' families. There had been some journalist interest early on, and then it went quiet, the way things go quiet in certain countries when they are meant to. I remember reading that and thinking, this is just the internet. Someone dramatizing things. Construction projects have deaths. China builds fast and big and sometimes corners are cut. I didn't think about it for long. The train stopped at 2:41 a.m. There was no announcement before it happened. It just decelerated in a way that felt slightly wrong, and then it stopped completely. The lights flickered once, came back on at a lower level. The screen and the headrest in front of me went dark. Sarah sat up. For a moment, no one said anything. Then one of the young guys at the back said something in Mandarin, loud and questioning, and there was movement in the car as people lifted their blinds and looked outside. There was nothing to see. Only trees and nothing else. The announcement came about 4 minutes later. A conductor's voice, first in Mandarin, then in English. There had been a technical fault somewhere along the line ahead. The train had stopped as a precautionary measure. Engineers had been contacted. A recovery team would be dispatched, but given their current location in the forest, their exact position still being established, it would take some time. The estimate was approximately 3 hours. Some people groaned. The family with the children. The mother was already trying to get the older kid back to sleep. The woman with the tablet put it down. The older couple exchanged one look. The temperature in the car shifted slightly. The air conditioning had gone off with the main power. Not dramatically, but you could feel it. It was June and outside it was warm. Within about 40 minutes, people were uncomfortable. The car had gotten stuffy. One of the young guys at the back had gone to talk to someone who appeared to be a staff member. A young woman in a uniform who looked like she was doing her best with a situation she hadn't been trained for. He came back and told the others something. They argued for a while and then one of them went back to the staff member again. Sarah asked me what I thought was happening. I said a technical fault. She asked if that was common for a first run. I said I didn't know. She was looking out the window. I watched her face. She wasn't scared. Sarah is not someone who scares easily. But still, I could see that she was alerted. She kept looking at the tree line. The trees were close on both sides. The track had been cut through and the ground dropped away steeply on the left. The tree canopy starting about 2 meters from the train window and then rising up and back into complete dark. On the right it was flatter, and you could see a bit further before the trees closed off the light. There was no wind that I could see from the way the branches were sitting. I remember thinking that it was very still. The staff eventually agreed to let passengers stand on the exterior platform between cars. There was a push from some of the passengers in the other cars, apparently. People were hot and frustrated, and someone had made the argument that it was summer. They weren't in danger, they just needed air. Sarah and I went out to the platform between cars 4 and 5. A few other people were already there. The night air came in immediately, warm but moving, which was better than nothing. The smell was pine, and something damp underneath it, soil and wet moss. The forest sounds came with it. Insects and a bird, somewhere far back in the trees, repeating the same call. We stood there for maybe 15 minutes. 2 of the young guys from the back of the car appeared at the door behind us and nodded at us and then hopped down off the platform onto the ground beside the track. They walked a short distance from the train, maybe 20 meters, until they were at the edge of the light, and they stopped there. I could see one of them had a small bag. I assumed they were smoking. Regular cigarettes maybe, or something else, I didn't know. Sarah watched them. She said something under her breath. I asked what. She said she wouldn't go out there. I said I knew. We stood there a little longer. The air was good. The bird kept calling from somewhere in the trees. Then it stopped, mid-call, like something had interrupted it. Sarah turned to look at me. I was already looking at her. After a moment they said we should go back inside. She said yes. We went back in. The 2 guys outside were still visible from the window, just standing there at the edge of the light. One of them had his phone out. I watched them for a while. Then the woman with the tablet sat down across from us and started talking to Sarah about where she was from, and I stopped watching the window. That was the last time I saw them. About 20 minutes later, a woman a few rows up started calling for someone. She was looking toward the back of the car, and then she was in the aisle, and then she was moving through to the next car. She was looking for her boyfriend. He had gone out for air sometime after Sarah and I came back inside. He had gone with her, she said. They'd been standing on the platform together, and she had come in because she felt a headache coming on, and he'd said he would follow in a minute. She had fallen asleep. No one had seen him come back in. The staff member went to check the exterior platforms. She came back and the expression on her face was the kind that people make when they're trying not to let it show that something is wrong. He wasn't on the platforms. He wasn't between any of the cars. The woman said his name several more times. Some passengers were waking up now, heads appearing over seats. The family with the 2 children, the mother was awake and keeping the kids close, I noticed that. Outside the windows, the lights from the train reached maybe 15 meters into the trees before giving up entirely, and beyond that was only darkness. Nobody wanted to say the word missing out loud. That's the thing I remember most about those first 20 minutes after people realized Daniel wasn't on the train. That's what she called him. She said it over and over. into the staff member's face, into the air, toward the window. And everyone around her was moving and talking and trying to help, but nobody used that word, like saying it would make it more real than it already was. His girlfriend's name was May. She was young, maybe mid-20s, and she had the specific kind of panic that looks calm from the outside. She wasn't screaming. She was just asking over and over in a steady voice where he was, as if enough asking would produce a logical answer. The two staff members in our car conferred with each other near the door. One of them got on a radio. There was a lot of Mandarin I couldn't follow, but the tone of it I could. It was the kind of tone people use when they are trying very hard not to broadcast that something has gone sideways. Sarah was holding my arm. I looked out the window again. The tree line hadn't changed. The lights from the train still reached the same distance. 15, maybe 18 meters. Then, nothing. I thought about the two guys who had gone out to smoke. I thought about how I had watched them standing at the edge of the light and then gotten distracted and never thought about them again. I didn't say anything to Sarah yet. The staff member with the radio came back into the car and spoke to me for a few minutes. Then she addressed the car as a whole in Mandarin, and then in English. She said that a few passengers appeared to be unaccounted for and that the recovery team had been updated. She said that everyone should remain on the train and that the exterior platforms were now closed. She said it in a professional voice, and she looked at the floor for one brief moment while she was saying it, which I noticed. So it wasn't just Daniel. It was the two guys as well. That was 3 people. An older man near the front of our car started talking loudly. He seemed angry. A woman behind us leaned across to the couple next to her and said something in a low voice. The family with the children. The father was awake now. He had his daughter on his lap and his son pressed into the seat beside him, and he was looking out the window with an expression that was very flat and very careful. He was maybe 8 or 9. He had been asleep when we boarded and had woken up somewhere during all of this. He wasn't crying. He was just sitting with his back against his father's arm, looking at the window the same way his father was. I remember thinking, that kid knows something is wrong. Children always know. It was somewhere around 3:40 a.m. when the kid disappeared. I didn't see it happen. Nobody seems to have seen it happen. What I know is that at some point, his father stood up in the aisle, and the look on his face was different from any expression I had seen on a person before. He said his son's name twice. The boy had been right next to him. The window above their seat was partially open. Not wide, maybe 8 centimeters. The kind of gap you'd open for airflow without thinking about it. The staff member went straight to the window and pulled it shut and locked it. Her hands were shaking. I could see it from 4 rows back. After that, every window in the car went closed. People reached up and did it themselves without being asked. You could hear the sound of them shutting. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened next because I want to be accurate, and the accurate version is not tidy. We heard the emergency door at the end of the car open, and then a man came through it, and he was wrong looking in a way that took a second to process. He was one of the passengers from another car, I found out later. He had gone out between cars to urinate, which is a thing people do on long journeys even when they're not supposed to. He came in through the door and he was covered in blood from his left shoulder down to his hip. The blood was dark and already drying at the edges in a way that meant it wasn't new. He was walking steadily, which seemed impossible given how much there was of it. But he was walking, and his face was completely white, and when he looked at us, he said in English, "Lock the doors." Then he said it again. He was looking at the staff member when he said it. She got on the radio immediately. Someone took the man and sat him down, and people were crowding around him, and Sarah had her hand on my arm again, tighter this time, and I was looking at his shoulder through the people between us. The tear in his shirt was long. Not jagged like a knife or shrapnel. It was more like something had drawn across him. 4 parallel lines from the base of his neck toward his collarbone, deep enough that I could see they hadn't stopped bleeding properly. He didn't say anything else about what had happened. He just kept saying, "Lock the doors, lock the windows, don't open anything." The sound started maybe 10 minutes after that. At first, I thought it was the train. Structural sounds, metal settling, the kind of thing old buildings make at night that you stop noticing after a while. But these sounded irregular and were moving, coming from the roof of the car, from the side. Something that sounded like dragging, long and slow, and then faster, then stopping. Then something hit the window next to me. Not hard enough to crack it, just hard enough that the whole pane shook in its frame and Sarah flinched back, and I put myself between her and the window without deciding to. On the glass, there were 3 marks, thin and close together. Something had scraped against it from the outside as whatever made them moved past. From the car behind us, someone screamed. Then someone else shouted something in Mandarin, fast and broken. Outside, at the very edge of the train's light on the right side, I saw something move. I am going to be specific about this because I have spent a lot of time since trying to make sure I'm not exaggerating. It was low to the ground, not small like a cat or a fox, but like it has chosen to be low. It was strangely black, like it had no reflective surface at all. I couldn't make out a proper shape because it moved fast, faster than the size of it seemed to allow, and it went back into the trees before I had more than 2 seconds to look at it. But I could see the height of it from the ground as it moved. It was maybe half a meter, 40-50 centimeters off the ground, and there wasn't just one. People were fully awake now, all of them. Any passenger who had slept through the earlier confusion was awake. The car was loud in the particular way of a group of people trying to stay quiet while being afraid. The sound of compressed panic, whispered and breathed more than spoken. The sounds on the roof had gotten more frequent. Whatever was up there was moving back and forth, and there was a concentrated series of sounds near the front of the car that was heavier than the rest. Then the window broke. It was the second window from the front on the left side. It didn't shatter the way glass shatters in films, all at once and explosive. It came in pieces, the frame giving first and then the glass folding inward. The sound was a crunch and then a brief high note and then a wet thud as something landed on the floor of the car. People moved away from it. The aisle filled. Sarah and I were pressed back against the right side of the car with 6 or 7 other passengers. What came through the window was not large. That's the part that people, when I've told this story since, always seem to struggle with. They expect something massive. Because massive makes sense. Massive you can categorize as a predator and file away somewhere in your understanding of the world. This was not massive. It was low and fast, and when it moved, it covered ground before you had processed that it had started moving. It went for the man nearest to it, the older man who had been angry earlier, and what it did to him happened quickly, and I am going to leave it at that. I don't think describing it in detail serves anything. What I can tell you is that there were 8 of us who rushed it. I don't know how that happened. There wasn't any conversation or plan. It was just that at a certain moment several of us were moving toward it at the same time. The father of the missing boy was one of them. He had a metal bag stand that had come loose from the overhead storage in the chaos, and he used it, and 2 other men had things. I don't know what. It took a while. That's what I'll say. It took a while, and by the end, there were 3 people with injuries, and the thing on the floor of the car was not moving anymore. It was lighter than it should have been for the amount of force it had taken to stop it. And the nails, I don't know what else to call them, the nails were long. They extended past the ends of its fingers, or what I'm calling fingers, by several centimeters. They were black like the rest of it. They were what had made the marks on the window. I stopped looking at it after a few seconds. So did most people. The sounds didn't stop after that. The ones on the roof, the ones against the sides. They didn't push back in the same way, but they didn't leave either. Something would hit a window and the whole car would tense and go silent. Something would drag across the roof the full length of the car, and nobody would move until it was over. May had stopped looking for Daniel. She was sitting on the floor between the seats with her knees drawn up and her eyes closed. The injured man, the one who had come back through the door, had gone quiet. Someone had pressed fabric against his shoulder. He was breathing. The father with the missing boy sat in the aisle. He wasn't doing anything. He was just sitting there. I held Sarah, and she held me, and we didn't talk. I kept watching the broken window. Someone had pushed a bag into the gap, but it wasn't enough, and everyone knew it wasn't enough. Nothing else came through, but you could hear them right outside it. The sounds they made were not loud. That was the worst part. They weren't shrieking or howling. They made small sounds, like something communicating. I don't know how long it went on. It felt like a very long time. The lights appeared at around 5:10 in the morning. Bright white lights from the far end of the track behind us, mounted on vehicles moving slowly through the trees on either side of the train. And then the sound of rotors, which I first thought was in my head from exhaustion. But Sarah heard it too, and she said, "Helicopters." They came from above and ahead, 2 of them, their searchlights sweeping the canopy and the ground on both sides of the train. When the lights hit the forest floor, the sounds on the roof stopped. Whatever was there went back into the trees instantly. The vehicles that had been moving through the forest reached us. They were military. Personnel carriers painted in a drab green that looked black in the dark except where the helicopter lights caught them. Armed soldiers moved along the sides of the train, and when they got the doors open and came inside, they were wearing tactical gear and they were not asking questions. They were directing. The evacuation was fast. Sarah and I were out within 10 minutes, moved along the trackside to one of the carriers. I remember the ground underfoot, the gravel of the embankment, and the way the helicopter light made everything bleached looking. One of the soldiers was standing between the carrier and the tree line, and he wasn't watching us. He was watching the forest with his rifle held across his chest, and he didn't move the whole time I was watching him. None of the soldiers looked surprised. I want you to understand what I mean by that. They were alert and they were fast and they were professional, but they did not look like people who had arrived to find something they hadn't expected. They looked like people doing a job they had been told to come and do. I don't know what to make of that. I've thought about it a lot. The debrief happened at a facility outside Hilar, about 2 hours away by road. It was a government building, and we sat in a large room while officials moved through and talked to people and took information. There was food. There was medical attention for the injured. They did not tell us anything useful. The official explanation, when it came, was a combination of the train breakdown, the stress of the situation, the darkness, and the forest creating a shared psychological event among the passengers. The man with the wounds on his shoulder was described as having been injured in the chaos inside the train. The broken window was described as structural failure. When I mentioned what I had seen on the floor of our car, the person taking my account nodded and wrote something down and then moved on. The thing on the floor of the car was not there when I looked back from the platform during the evacuation. I don't know when it was removed. Sarah didn't say much in the debrief. She answered what she was asked and didn't volunteer anything. There were 107 people on the 1207 from Manjuli to Harbin on the 14th of June. 62 of them were alive when the evacuation was completed. Of those 62, only 28 were officially recorded as having sustained no physical injuries. The Chinese state media reported a train crash on a new line in Inner Mongolia and said most passengers had been safely recovered. The story ran for 2 days and then disappeared from the feeds entirely. There was a brief mention of a government investigation into the technical fault that caused the crash. No results of that investigation have been published. Sarah is fine mostly. She's back in her country now. She messages me sometimes. She doesn't talk about the train. She sent me a photo last month of the view from her apartment. Snow on the rooftops. The kind of ordinary thing you send when you want a signal that you're okay, without saying you're okay. I've looked into the Dashinganling as much as I can since coming back. Most of what I've found is standard. Geography, climate, flora, and fauna. One older academic paper on indigenous Evenki oral traditions in the region mentions something in passing. The forest had been considered sacred land for a long time. Off limits. Not because of what was in it, but because the way protected land is off limits. Because of what had been left alone in it. The paper described it as something that had always been there. Something that people who lived at the edges of the forest had simply learned to account for and then learned not to talk about. I read that sentence 3 times. I think about the bartender in Manzuli wiping his glass. The way he went quiet. The way he spoke to the other man and then smiled at me and said it was a very modern train. He knew. I think he knew. I don't know what he thought we deserved for not knowing.